Hello, we are coming to you from Denver at the Cereals and Grains 19 meeting. And we have with us today Jean Storley, the executive editor from CFW, who is going to be talking with Tamra Ryan, our special guest, who is the CEO of the Women's Bean Project. So you're in for quite a treat as we have this conversation.
Okay, so Tamra, tell us a little bit about how you got involved in the Women's Bean Project.
Well, my involvement began as a volunteer. I was fascinated with the business model. I love this idea that there was this business, and the better the business did, the more women could be served. And so I went onto the sales and marketing committee because that was my background at the time. And I did that for about 6 months until the position of CEO came open. And I tried to talk my girlfriend into applying for the job. And according to her, I went on and on and on about what a great place Women's Bean Project was until finally she said, if you think it's so great, why don't you do it? And my first reaction was that I wasn't a nonprofit person because Women's Bean Project is a nonprofit. And her response to me was, it's a business, so who cares what the tax structure is or the corporate structure is? It's still a business.
Hmm.
And so that was 16 years ago.
That's awesome.
Wow.
Yeah. So I understand that it's an exciting time for Women's Bean Project. You're celebrating a big anniversary, so tell us a little bit about the history and what are you doing to celebrate it?
Well, we are milking the 30th anniversary for all it's worth. So the whole year is our anniversary year. And we're really celebrating having been founded in 1989. Our founder was volunteering at a daytime homeless shelter for women and kids. And she was embedded there for a whole school year. And what she saw was women would come in and use the services of the shelter. And then they'd leave because they'd get a job. But then the same women kept coming back over and over again. And so while they had the ability to get the job, and the shelter was keeping them safe when they didn't have a job, they didn't have the ability to keep that job. And so that was a cycle that they were caught in. She thought, if I could teach women to work by actually working, that would be the cure for poverty. So she noticed, she was in her late 50s when she'd gone back to get her master's degree in social work. Wow. So she noticed that a lot of her friends were eating bean soup for health reasons.
Yeah.
And so she invested $500 of her own money in beans and put two women to work, making 10 bean soup. So that was our first product. And they did that for the 1989 holiday season, so right around this time of year. And that first season, they sold $6,100. And that's a pretty good return on investment.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that she didn't really think of it as a big business or as a business. She really just thought of the business or making the product as a way to advance the cause. In fact, she has told me, she's in her late 80s today, and Jossie has told me that when the first time somebody wanted a case of soup, she couldn't believe anybody, that was 12 units. She couldn't believe anybody wanted that many. And, today we're sending pallets of soup to, across the country. So she didn't really envision what it would become, except she did have this vision of changing women's lives by, providing stepping stones to self-sufficiency.
That's awesome. And it's perfect that it's soup season.
It is. It is. And January is National Soup Month.
Oh.
So we milk that for everything that's worth
absolutely.
as well.
Of
Well,
course.
it's great that you're here. We have a new Pulse division that's just starting up in the organization, and there's a lot of beans and pulses talked about this week as well. So
Yes.
that's a great tie-in.
I've
Yeah.
learned a lot about beans in this job.
Good. Yeah.
One of the things that I think is really great and was not intentional, but as a former marketer, I think about it this way, is that, beans as a rotation crop, adding nutrients back into the soil is really what we're doing as well. So beans are a really great metaphor for our work. If we're, helping women and having them go back into the community and really, enhancing their families and the community as a whole. So I really think that though it was accidental in many ways that was our first product, it really is an apt metaphor for the work that we do.
I love that.
So actually, you really led right into my next question. So in addition to bean soups, then tell us, how you branched out the product line and what are some of the innovative things that you're doing?
Well, bean soup does not say summer as much as I try. And so we knew that we needed to have other products. We started with 10 bean soup, which interestingly is still our bestseller 30 years later. But the way people eat today after 30 years is not the same. Not that many people make a pot of soup. Households are smaller. You know, people aren't spending all day making their dinner anymore. And so we knew we needed to have other kinds of products. Initially, it expanded into baking goods. So we started with a cornbread mix to go with the soup. And then that expanded into cookie mixes and brownie mix and a pretty wide variety. And then we felt like we wanted to have things that weren't just dinner oriented. So we introduced scone mix, and we have biscuit mix that has an icebox jam mix in it. So you just add water and cook the jam on the stovetop for 4 minutes, and then put it in the fridge, and you've got jam to go with your biscuits.
Cool.
Then we've really, how people eat today, more ready to eat, faster, and we've become kind of a gift item, and so we do try to introduce products, or at least make the packaging kind of gifty.
Yes, yes.
So we have lots of different spices, and we want there to be a value proposition on our spices, so we intentionally make them spice blends that can be used a lot of different ways. So when you open the tin, the packaging is going to give you 4 or 5 different recipes for how you can use that spice blend. Mm-hmm. We have popcorn now with spices to flavor your popcorn. We have instant rice and bean cups, and we're getting ready to introduce, after the first of the year, some instant breakfast cups. So we're pretty excited about, product development is one of my favorite things, but it's really fun to introduce new products. All of it really, of course, is to try to increase sales, and also to try to really bring the next generation of customers. We're really well supported by the boomers.
Yes.
But if we're not careful, we'll die with the boomer generation, and we don't want that to happen. Right?
And that was one of the topics of discussion yesterday in one of the sessions, is just the change of how people are eating and preparing their food. And it used to be that I went to one market, and now I go to all these different markets and get things that are easier, but that you tend to spend more time doing all of that to have an easier way to cook.
Well, they care a lot. Also, our customers care a lot about the sources of the products. So we're asked, even though it's of course not our mission to have clean products or be organic or non-GMO, we do have a responsibility to our customers for those things, because they ask about that. And so we do everything we can to have the cleanest ingredients.
Mm-hmm. That's great, yeah.
So we'd like to hear about your book, The Third Law, and I found the book quite fascinating, the stories of the women, but also that the stories stitched together to tell a narrative about yourself and your own journey into this world of social enterprise, and just the whole culture shock of starting to work with this population. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about why you decided to write the book.
Well, I joke that I initially decided to write the book because I had noticed that I'd become much more interesting at cocktail parties when I after I took the job at the Bean Project. But that was really because I had all these stories, and there were times when I just couldn't believe that things were happening, and I needed to tell. Over time, I realized that I needed to tell people, because my opinions were being changed, or my biases and my prejudices were being changed, because I was meeting women who I might have labeled as a felon or an addict or somebody who had always been on welfare. But then I was meeting her and realizing that as I sat across the table from her, and a lot of times the only difference between us was the accident of birth. I happened to be born to a white middle-class family in Colorado Springs, and from the very beginning I expected I was going to go to college. But what would my life have been like if I had grown up in a family where both parents were addicts, or parents weren't around because maybe both were incarcerated? Yeah. And so some of it was the humility of realizing that that I'm not so different. And some of it was also realizing that the women are disenfranchised in every sense, right? If they have a felony, they can't vote. Mm-hmm. They can't vote with their wallets because they don't have the income to do that. And that began to make me feel that I had a responsibility to tell their stories. Mm-hmm. So I've structured the book in a way that I was able to talk about the things that I'd learned and tell their stories as a means for learning that. And then a whole bunch of research. I was really fascinated with how many women were coming to us who had been incarcerated. And it just seemed like we were, as a country, incarcerating so many women. And you think about what that does to families when you take away their mom. And usually these are single parent households, so the mom is the only parent around. But what that does to a family when you've incarcerated her and with the mom, and what happens to the kids. And so I started doing research, and I found out that between 1977 and 2004, the female inmate population grew 757%.
757%.
Yeah. And then as I dug deeper, I realized that there are a lot of policies that have been created that were supposed to be to keep us safer as a society or to fix a problem. But what ended up happening were the unintended consequences of that policy. And so the book was kind of a journey because I was learning along the way, but it was really a way for me to reflect on all the things that I'd learned and really believe that I have a platform for telling the women's stories. And so that was the purpose of it.
Why don't you tell us one of the stories?
Well, one of my favorite stories is about a young woman named Selena. So she was 21 when she came to work for us, and that's our youngest age that we hire. But we have no top end age. The average age of a woman we hire is 39. So Selena was pretty young compared to the average. And she came to us because her pastor had referred her to us. When she was 12, her mom introduced her to cocaine.
Oh.
And at 13, her mom kicked her out of the house because she perceived that Selena was competition for boyfriends. So with the streets as her home, she had to drop out of school, right? Because she didn't have a place to go every night to even prepare to go to school the next day. And at 13, she was too young to work. Yeah. So she ended up with this group of people who their interest in her was the fact that she could help them with, the crimes that they committed to, and all the things that they did to both create and sell drugs. She did that for 5 years. She was on the streets that way. And she tells stories about having been held up at gunpoint, holding other people up at gunpoint, doing things that, she would never want anyone to have to hear about. Yeah. And at 18, she was arrested, and that probably saved her life because it was finally an opportunity to get her off the streets. Yeah. So she spent 3 years in the criminal justice system, working her way through, and her pastor at the end of that time, at 21, referred her to us. And she is this beautiful blonde, long blonde hair, bright blue eyes, and she's just sort of the look of innocence. Except her, when you hear her story, you realize her life hasn't been that at all. When she came to us, she had a 3rd grade reading level. And so we helped her enroll in an adult high school, and she learned all these skills around working and what it meant to work, because she, really during her formative years, she'd been on the streets. But she also had to learn how to sort of deal with stress and how to deal with her new world without using, because that had also happened during her formative years. Yeah. While she was with us, she was in an abusive relationship, and we helped her with the resources she needed to get out of that. And eventually she graduated and went to work for a grocery store, for Safeway. And her boss there taught her how to count change and was really supportive of her. Selena is someone I've kept in touch with for a really long time. And so today she lives in North Dakota, and she's married. She has a 6-year-old daughter. Aww. And what I think is so amazing about that is her daughter's never going to know a time where her mom is an addict or her mom isn't working. And now Selena has a full-time job, but also a part-time job working in a local prison. And she does counseling for women who are in prison, which I think is just sort of a really lovely, sort of full circle story. Right. A couple years ago, we had an opportunity to have a little feature story in Weight Watchers magazine, and they wanted to talk to a graduate. So we introduced Selena, and they did a really pretty picture of Selena with her daughter. And when the magazine came out, we made sure Selena had a copy. The next day, I walk in my office, and there's a beautiful bouquet of flowers in my office. And as I look at the card, I see that it's Selena had sent them as a thank you. Aww. And so I called her, and she said, when I was little, I told my dad I wanted to be a model. And he said, you could never do that. And she said, see, I made it into a magazine.
Oh, I got goosebumps.
I did too. I got goosebumps several times during that story. Yeah. Wow. Well, my husband read the book, and he is an avid New Yorker reader, and he said it's not only amazing stories, but it's New Yorker quality of writing. So that's a
Well,
big kudos
yes,
coming
I
from
take that
him.
as a high compliment from your husband.
Yes, and it also motivated him because you talked at the end, if you're not able to volunteer to the Women's Bean Project, volunteer for something else. So
Yeah.
he signed up, and he's now a big brother. So he has his little that he gets together with every weekend, Franco, and I think he's caring about making a difference in this little boy's life. So that's pretty cool that you inspired
I think that's
him to
great.
change, and to,
Give back.
give back
Right.
and to
Yeah.
help. So, it doesn't just have to be women that can get excited about Women's Bean
No,
Project.
and I think we all look around and see things we don't like, but we don't always do something about it. And maybe it's because we don't feel we have time or whatever. But there's always a way that we can make an impact. And I think that one of the best things about that is the reality is you feel way better, after doing it. I mean, it gives more than you.
Right.
It gives more than you give.
Mhm. You
Right.
receive
Yeah,
more, yep.
exactly. I totally agree. So, Cereals and Grains 19 is focusing on the global food system, and some of the mega themes that are being addressed under that are sustainability, food safety and security, ingredient sourcing. Tell us a little bit about how Women's Bean Project um, is affected by some of these global trends and how you are responding to them.
It's interesting because I think when we have a tendency professionally to be pretty siloed, I think food is one of the ways that everything intersects because we all need food. We've had situations where when we've gone to buy beans, it wasn't until that moment where we learned that, for instance, the tariffs on black beans are lifted a couple times a year for selling to Mexico. And all of a sudden the cost of black beans would skyrocket. Or another time we were selling lentils, our government was selling lentils to Haiti. And we couldn't to save our lives, we couldn't get lentils. But things that we, as a small business, we don't even think about, but we are affected by. But then even at the very far end, you think about the women we serve who usually are not able to eat healthy. So if they're incarcerated or they're in a halfway house, someone else is providing their food. In a halfway house, they're paying for that food, but it's not high quality food.
Okay.
They're not allowed to buy their own food. But then even when they're out, the neighborhoods they tend to live in are food deserts. And we all know, if we're paying any attention to the world of food, that cheap food is unhealthy food. And so, the women we serve don't have a lot of money to buy their own food. And when they do have that money, what they can afford is typically not very healthy.
Right.
We do, one of the components that even though it's indirectly related to employment, is we do a nutrition course. And we have a nutritionist come in and teach the women even just about flavors. So how they can make with these combinations of spices, how they can make the food that perhaps didn't taste that great before taste better. But we're working with women who come from a culture that typically they didn't eat well or healthy when they were growing up, and so they don't even have a reference point for how to do that now.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Wow. So today is the Innovation Day at Cereals and Grains 19. Let's chat a little bit about how Women's Bean Project and the things that you're doing around innovation. And I think, social enterprise, we're understanding what the concept of that is. But I know that you personally are involved in this global organization around social enterprise. So tell us a little bit about that. We have a lot of global members, and where are some of the bright spots around social enterprise in the world?
Well, the U.S. is kind of behind in the field of social enterprise. So maybe it would be helpful if I defined what social enterprise is.
Sure.
Yeah.
So a social enterprise uses the marketplace, selling products or services to advance a social mission. We happen to do it through employment. So we hire women to work for us for 6 to 9 months, and they make our products, and ultimately our ability to pay them and to support our business is based on our sales. But really our purpose of having this business is to employ women and teach them skills. But there are lots of other kinds of social enterprises, whether it is a company that is trying to remove plastics from the environment, or There are, in the UK in particular, social enterprise is much more advanced and it's a much more accepted practice. And it's not to be confused with corporate social responsibility, where a company sort of adds a component of giving back in some way with to look better, to be more attractive to employees. This is really about the mission being baked into what you do. So we really are two businesses. We are a food business and we are a human services business, and one doesn't exist without the other. And so in my mind, that's sort of the test of a social enterprise, is if the business and the mission are so intertwined that neither can stand alone. The UK and even parts of Europe, social enterprise is much more common. I've gotten involved with the Social Enterprise World Forum, and every year they have a forum. It changes continents every year. It just was in Ethiopia this past month, and next year it will be in Nova Scotia. And what's really great is it brings social entrepreneurs and people representing social enterprises from all over the world together. And the reality is, as witnessed by the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the challenges we have around the world are similar. What they look like on the ground, someone living in poverty in the US is going to live on more than $2 a day, but that doesn't mean they're not still living in poverty, and it's relative poverty. Yeah. And so we all come together to talk about how we're working to solve these social problems, and it's really exciting to see the different solutions around the world, and how creative people have gotten together to say, this isn't okay with me, and I want to do something about it.
Well, it's a really beautiful model about how the nonprofit world can respond to funding challenges that just continue to get even greater as governments pull back, corporations get less generous, people feel pinched, and so this self-sustaining model, I think, is really forward thinking. Even though you've been doing it for 30 years, there's a lot. It could be applied more broadly. So let's just switch gears and look at just how Women's Bean Project manages innovation and product development. Tell us a little bit about how you do that.
Well, we've done a lot of different things. First, it's just acknowledging the fact that that we have our best-selling product is 30 years old, and that's, on the one hand, that's great, and on the other hand, to me, that's scary, because I don't want us to to put ourselves out of business because we rest on our laurels, and eventually our sales decline. And also, I want to go to work every day being able to hire every woman who needs us. And the way we're going to do that is to increase sales. And the way we're going to increase sales is by being much more in tune with culinary shifts and how people are eating today. So we had this great opportunity to hire a company called Sterling Rice Group. They happen to be based in Boulder, Colorado, but they do work all across the country. Yeah. And their expertise is to look at food trends and culinary shifts and really make recommendations to companies on what kinds of products make sense. So it was an overlay of what makes sense for us, and in light of what we're capable of doing, and also sort of what kinds of products our customers, both our current customers and the customers we'd like to have, would buy. And they created a whole product development pipeline for us of different concepts. So our popcorn came out of that. We just introduced a line of snacks, ready-to-eat snacks that are all natural. Most of them are organic, really delicious products. And again, that came out of that idea that people want ready-to-eat kinds of products. Our beans and rice cups came out of that work, and even our breakfast cups. Once we have those basic ideas, then we go and contract with food scientists. And that's the fun part, right? Yeah. Because that's all the ideation and taste testing and things like that. And once we think we've honed in on both a flavor profile and different aspects of the product that we think work, then we go out and test it with, we're really fortunate. We have in a year 300 to 400 volunteers who work with us in a variety of ways. So we always have people coming and going. And these are people who are our current customers and also represent, many are millennials, and so they represent sort of the next generation of people coming up. So we have this sort of cadre of people who are already supporters of ours who are willing to be our guinea pigs.
Nice.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's really great. So a couple years ago, we also knew that we needed to update our packaging because our packaging was outdated and our brand had sort of evolved, and I think what we had fallen to was putting too much information on every package.
Yeah, common mistake.
Yes. So I had heard that sometimes General Mills does pro bono projects. And I have the attitude that you should always ask because they
Yeah.
can always say no.
Right.
So I approached a woman in the marketing department at General Mills, and I sent her this email sort of selling Women's Bean Project and saying we needed an update. And sure enough, she replied to me. And she was able to recruit an agency that works for General Mills, an agency called Pearl Fisher. They have offices in New York and London. And they took us on as a pro bono project that was probably valued at about $250,000 project.
Wow.
And they basically helped us revamp our whole look and feel of all of our products and also our packaging. So that we would stand up on store shelves and really better tell the story. In the first year after we introduced that new packaging, that was in June of 2017, and that first year after that, our grocery sales doubled.
Wow.
It was such a huge transformation.
Double.
Yes.
Doubled.
Wow, so you contract out for the R&D and then, and I've worked with Sterling Rice. They are an amazing creative group, so you are really lucky to have them right down the road and that they did some pro bono for you too? Is that right?
We paid them a little bit,
Yeah.
but they gave us way
Deeply
more work than we
discounted.
paid for,
Yeah.
yes.
So, just for the, listeners to this podcast, you can see how professional expertise can support this organization because then they don't need to be spending out of their profits to run their innovation pipeline. So I think there is a lot of ways that the scientists in cereals and grains can be helpful. So tell us a little bit more about how they might be able to volunteer their professional expertise.
Well, we're a manufacturing operation. So if people have expertise around how to set up production lines. So after 30 years, we've finally introduced equipment and automation to our processes. So I wouldn't say we look like a factory that you typically walk into. It's not from start to finish automated, but so we're calling it semi-automation. But, that's a really big deal for us. Everything was produced manually until we bought this equipment over the summer. And so what that means is as we introduce equipment, SOPs for how the equipment is operated, how we can train the women. One of the idiosyncrasies of our business is by design, we're hiring women who are not the best employees, right? And we don't know if they're going to come to work every day.
Yeah.
We have to be really great at training. And then as soon as they become great employees, we let them leave because that's our model.
Yeah.
And so we hire, starting in 2020, we'll hire every month. And so when you think about what that means in terms of needing great processes and great procedures for training is really important. Of course, we always need expertise in food safety. Gosh, I almost can't. There's so many ideas that I have. We like to be innovative. We're not going to rest on our 30-year laurels. So there are often ways when we understand what someone's expertise is, we think, oh, I know exactly how you can help us.
Well, that's great. So as we wrap up here, what's next for Women's Bean Project?
Well, we are currently looking for a new building. And in fact, after we finish the podcast here today, I'm going to go be looking at real estate. We are in about a 10,000 square foot building right now. It's an awesome building. It's an old firehouse that we bought from the city of Denver in 1995. But we need about 20,000 square feet. So we're in the midst of kissing a lot of frogs. I look at a lot of real estate, and hopefully within the next year or so we'll be moving.
Yeah.
But that means we'll have to take down all of our production lines and put them back up. But in this new facility, what will be great is that we will be able to have static production lines. Right now, when we put up a production line, a lot of times we have to take it back down to make room to make something else. Oh. And then we have pods that we store our packaging materials and things like that because we don't have enough room. So this will be really a transformative space for us. So that's a lot where a lot of my attention is going right now. And then in January, February timeframe, we'll be introducing some cereals, some breakfast cups, so instant breakfast cups that will have some really fun flavors. Blueberry chai and raspberry mocha and some other things like that.
Well, we have some processing engineers in the Cereals and Grains Association, and as you get around to designing the line for those new plants, it'd be awesome if some of our experts could give you a hand.
It would be.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Tam, very much for joining us and sharing more about the Women's Bean Project. And I'm going to go give my donation. I'm going to get some gift boxes ordered for holidays coming up. And also, I just want to mention, too, that your book, proceeds go to Women's Bean. So that's another way that people can help. So.
And where can they get your book?
They can get it at womensbeanproject.com, or it's available on Amazon.
Okay.
So both the paperback and ebook.
Okay. Yeah. So look for the products in stores, and they can buy online. There's a store on your website.
There is. Womensbeanproject.com is primarily a store. You can also find all of our products on Amazon. But then if you go to our website and you look, we're in about 1,000 stores across the U.S., and so you can easily find a store near you.
Okay.
That's great.
Wonderful.
Okay. Well,
thank you so much for joining us. This has been fantastic, and hopefully we have a mutual benefit moving forward as well.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And thank you.
And good luck with that real estate search.